Nighttime on Still Waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways. Seventh of April, Monday. Warm snowflakes of Blackthorn float and drift along the towpath among cowslip yellow and bluebell blue. The sheep are loath to move, preferring to lie on the grass, white with night frost, enjoying the heat of the sun on their backs. Tonight, it's as if the night is holding its breath. The wind drops, as if it no longer has the energy to push against the sluggish air. The barometer on the study wall drifts anti-clockwise. The spell of high pressure is breaking tonight. The air closes in around us. Us. The erica, the wide-eyed moorhen, the ducks in their twos and threes and fours, the rabbits in the warren high above the canal, perhaps even the sloping fox and badger, all root snuffles and paws. And we all wait. Wait beneath a night heavy with change. The light of a full moon seeps and bleeds milky through the cloud, and the cowslips glow like ghostly ladies in nodding bonnets on the bankside. And this is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the darkness of a close and claggy April night, to you, wherever you are. Oh, I'm so pleased that you could make it. It's really lovely to see you, and I was so hoping you'd be able to come tonight. Thank you. I put the kettle on and restocked the biscuit barrel, so please come inside. Take the weight off your feet and the worries off your shoulders. And let's spend this night together, quiet under this brooding sky. And welcome aboard. Black blades of sedge new growth are shooting among the yellowed bone rattle of last year's reeds and rushes, and the towpath and hedgerows foam and billow with airy clouds of blackthorn blossom. In places, we walk down avenues lined with walls each side of us of white petal and scented memories and old tears. It's only at times like these that I realize how many sloe bushes we have along here. Misty dark globes of midnight sour, shining with such perfect flowered starlight. I found these few lines among a collection of poems that Mum had gathered and printed out in a little book for herself that she called A Celebration of Plants, Wild and Tame. It's called Blackthorn Blossom, written by John Bond in spring 1994. Buttermilk white, thick as cream, and from a distance sweet as a drift of wood smoke. I plunge my face into the scented petals, and drunken bees fall about like punters on a pub crawl. And then there's been such light, such perfect April light that paints the colours in the way only April can. The deep, rich range of greens, emerald, lime, dew-fresh spearmint. Oh, and the yellows, coltsfoot, celandine, dandelion, cowslip, avens and primrose, sprinkled with deep blues and violets of vetch and bluebell, and the tiny purple trumpets of ground ivy, and the chalky pastel of forget-me-nots blue. Oh, and skies of such blue. That speedwell blue that you can only find on the cover of a childhood annual or a Croyer painting. It's been a good thing that the sun has been shining so strongly recently, for the depths of such blue would surely put out and drown a lesser one. And more recently, wisps and swirls of cloud, forming and gathering. And so, today, for the first time in what seems like a long while, the sky has turned milky with cirrus feathers and washes of stratus. And this morning I saw local ducklings for the first time this year. Newly hatched, tiny balls of fluff and awkward feathers, 12 of them, that buzzed and bobbed around a wary mother. And one of our neighbours told me about a toad that she'd heard near her boat. And now I can't unhear it, sporadic croaks that seem far too loud, subterranean, sub-aqua. They echo around my consciousness in the way that the call of a cuckoo does, or the siren of an emergency vehicle. And the carp are sunning themselves in the shallows where the coltsfoot and cowslips blaze. They're beginning to somersault too, thrashing the water into a crystal scattering of light and forming enigmatic circles across the mirror-still surface. Meanwhile, Maggie has been making friends with her lambs. There's a small paddock where those who have either been rejected by their mothers or who have other needs that require them to be hand-reared are kept. They get plenty of attention, and so are hand-tame and inquisitive, nuzzling up to the fences for a sniff or a head rub. And when Maggie goes past, they run up, cluster towards her, sneaking their muzzles through the gaps between the fence railings, and there they rub noses. And at this time of the season, it's hard not to be reminded of John Clare and his wonderful observations in his poem, Young Lambs. The spring is coming by a many signs. The trays are up, the hedges broken down that fence the haystack, and the remnant shines like some old antique fragment weathered brown, and where the sun peeps in every sheltered place, the little early buttercups unfold, a glittering star or two, till many trace the edges of the blackthorn clumps in gold. And then a little lamb bolts up behind the hill and wags his tail to meet the ewe, and then another, sheltered from the wind, lies all his length as dead, and lets me go close by, and never stirs, but baking lies, with legs stretched out, as though he could not rise. It's been so lovely to hear from you, and thank you for taking the time and the trouble to get in touch. And I'm really sorry that recently I have been so slow in replying. I'm still struggling to keep ahead of things, and recently the only way I've been able to do that is by fairly strictly compartmentalizing the different parts of my life, particularly in relation to work and the podcast. Nevertheless, I do want to assure you it's always a joy to hear from you. And I appreciate your comments and observations and bits of news. It's always lovely and a delight. And thank you so much to Captain Bugwash, Mark Elvin, for sending me that poem that you found, Mark, Fen Tiger. It is wonderful, and I am planning to include it. And you're right, I'm also sure that Barry and the Fens would really like it too. And once I finished reading Mum's account of the totally worthwhile risk, I actually want to do and have planned for a while an episode featuring the Fen country. And I think that poem would fit so beautifully with it. A few years back, I wrote something on the Fens, and I want to try and dig it out. So thank you so much. And hello and welcome to Christina Nielsen Marsh, a new listener who contacted me on Instagram. Thank you. And I'm really glad you absolutely love the podcast. And welcome aboard. And Christina is an artist, and talking of wonderful artists, thank you to Callie Conway for the shout out. Really appreciate it. And hello to Sem Raug. It's again always good to see you, and thank you for your support. And I was really touched the last couple of weeks by so many people who have commented on the last episode and Mum's writing. Again, it is really appreciated. And thank you to Mind Shambles and for your wonderful words. He wrote, "Your mum had a lovely way with words, effortlessly capturing the sense of time and place with clarity and comfort. A lovely heirloom that lives on, bringing happiness to new ears." Thank you. Mum would have been so touched with that. And in a similar vein, I loved Martin 2012's comment on Instagram. He wrote, "Now you have told us this wonderful story, it will remain in the consciousness and the collective memory of all the people that hear it. So therefore they will live forever as long as someone remembers the story." And I love that way of looking at it. And it's such a wonderful thought. Thank you, Martin. And it was also really lovely to hear from Uriel Dana. Sorry, Uriel, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and please let me know if I'm not. I'm actually deeply in debt to Uriel, although she might not know it, but she posts some of the most beautiful Japanese woodblock art on Blue Sky. Your posts are keeping me sane, Uriel, so thank you. And she wrote, again, some beautiful words, that it's very intimate and personable as well as historically fascinating. And again, Mum would have been so amazed and pleased. And I agree, actually, historically, they are really fascinating. And the next couple of episodes in particular are incredibly interesting and shine a fascinating light on Canada in the late 1950s, but also in a way on England and its values. And I wonder how many others will react the same way as me when I'm reading it, of a world that in some ways is both totally different and yet amazingly similar. That old adage of history having to repeat itself seems to keep coming back into my mind time and time again as I read Mum's account. And I was also really interested to hear from long-time listener Anna McKellar, who wrote, "My parents emigrated to Toronto too, for similar reasons, which became true as my father, who had missed out on a degree because of a serious illness, was employed well above the level that he would have been in Britain as a non-graduate. Even the description of the ship and bon voyage cards are familiar." And I'm obviously not going to give any spoilers away, but we must share notes, Anna, particularly as Mum's account of their time there unfolds further. It'd be really interesting to hear the similarities and the differences in their experience. And also it'd be really interesting to hear from Canadian listeners too on their thoughts and reactions. Another long-time listener, Jason Polite, wrote to say how much he enjoyed listening to Mum's account, and also to Lee's description of the seasons 8,000 feet up. And he noted that it's funny just how different the weather is in Colorado compared to Arkansas. But I'm also sort of guessing that elevation has a part to play in this too. But Jason also commented on the photographs accompanying the episodes. Yes, they are a real and actually quite poignant treasure trove. Unsurprisingly, they're really familiar to me, having seen them since I was a small lad in our family photograph albums. I remember them. Who has family photograph albums now, I wonder? However, now placing them in this context, and I guess perhaps spending a little bit more time with them, it's like seeing them anew. Unfortunately, because of the way the podcasts are streamed on various directories and providers, not many listeners will be able to see them. However, if you do go to the noswpod.com website, you can view them there if you click on the specific episode page link. And I'm going to be uploading a lot more photographs over the next few weeks. And talking of Lee, as Jason has just done, Barry in the Fens got in contact with me saying, "Oh, how I envy Lee living in a log cabin in the Rocky Mountains. I'd swap my bungalow in the Fens of Norfolk at any time. Pure bliss." I'm sure Lee would say, it has its moments. It has its moments. And actually, Barry, I think you might miss the Fens after a while. There is something strangely haunting that can get into the blood and under the skin about that particular area of land and water and light. Greetings also to Lucy Bolt aboard the narrowboat Jasmine. And thank you. I'm so glad that you adored the reading from Mum's book, and I hope you enjoy the following ones too. And also to Tracy Thomas. Thank you, Tracy. And to Deb Moon Mountford. Well done, Deb, for not falling asleep. And the thing that I'd forgotten to mention was that Mum never kept a diary. Well, certainly not in her adult life anyway. And yet in her 60s, she began to write copious notes about the different parts of her life, as we found out when we started to clear their house out. Books of names of people and who they were and what they did from Mum's childhood onwards, and then notes on events. And of course, when people were over, these stories were told and retold, and so there's in some ways little in her writing that's completely new to me, just the detail. Oh, there's an amazing feat of memory nonetheless. And I also loved the story related to me by another long-time listener, Margaret, of her time as a 19-year-old in Germany as part of her degree, and how, having recently landed in Germany and missed the bus to her lodgings, she accepted a ride from a complete stranger at a pub who said that he knew where her lodging was. Yeah, the innocence and courage of youth. It was all right. It turned out that he did know the place and the people who owned the lodgings. But it's interesting, isn't it? Looking back, one can be quite startled at what now appear horrific risks when things could have gone catastrophically wrong. And yet, I don't know, but there are also parts of my life now where I'm taking risks that would have dissolved me into a puddle of iced water in my youth. I guess courage and the sense of, or perhaps what we see as risk, changes with age. And finally, a big thank you to all of our Lockwheelers for supporting this podcast. They are Gabriela Marie Rodriguez-Veinotte, Kevin B., Fleur and David Mcloughlin, Lois Raphael, Tania Yorgey, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hinds, David Dirom, Chris and Anne on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Alison on the narrowboat Mucker, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V., Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, Narrowboat Precious Jet, Linda Reynolds Birkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. Reading Mum's account again, what strikes me most powerfully are the descriptions of that giddy disorientation of what we would now call culture shock. Mum and Dad really were stepping into a totally new and almost alien world to them. Certainly one very different from that which they had left in lower middle-class southern England. In the last episode, Mum and Dad had started out on their new life in Canada on board the liner Seven Seas. Their excitement was slightly dampened by Mum experiencing seasickness. However, thanks to some strange but sage advice from their cabin steward, Mum soon got over it, and was once again looking forward to starting their new life together in Canada. Canada. There and back and why. A totally worthwhile risk that was never regretted, taken by Mick and Erica, as seen through the eyes of Erica. Part 2. 4. If I'd found the rolling of the ship a bit unnerving at first, it was just as well I hadn't known what we were in for. For suddenly we were hit by a tremendous storm with force 9 winds. Now the motion of the ship changed. Not only was it rocking from side to side, but a bucking motion was added, as the bow of the ship ploughed into a trough, leaving the screw clear of the water with a great screaming sound. Then, out of the trough, the ship staggered, and then down again into the next trough. Now there was an even greater diminishing of the passengers as they disappeared to their cabins, but not before being violently sick, either where they sat or in the hand-wash basins that were to be found in the corridors. All the toilets were completely blocked and were overflowing, and one had to have a pretty strong stomach to cope with the sights and smells. All the companionways started sprouting rope handholds, and all the barrel chairs in the lounges were chained to the floor. And looking down into the dining saloon, we watched the stewards pouring water over the tablecloths, thus preventing our cutlery and plates, etc., from sliding off the table into our laps. And in the bars, the paper beer mats were also soaked with water, for the same reason. But despite all the precautions, there were still casualties, and people began to appear with their arms in slings or hobbling on crutches. The medical team must have been working non-stop. One afternoon, during the height of the storm, a passenger sitting in one of the barrel chairs in the lounge suddenly found himself hurtling from one side of the lounge to the other, as, unbeknown to him, his chair had somehow missed being fixed down. Fortunately, some of the other passengers managed to get him out of the careering chair, and luckily he came to no harm. Another night, as the bucking ship ploughed on through the tremendous waves, which incidentally swept over the entire ship, preventing, should anyone even want to, from anyone going out on the deck, and even the bow lounge windows were constantly covered by seawater that was thrown up, so preventing any view of the outside. But this one night, as we were all sitting in the lounge, suddenly all the lights went out, which was extremely unnerving, especially in conjunction with the regular screaming of the screw as it reared heavenwards, making the whole situation extremely eerie. Fortunately, the generators were soon repaired, and we had light again. But that occurrence wasn't helped by a know-all who proceeded to tell us that he knew for certain that the boat was well past its sell-by date, etc., etc. The crew were very good at putting on film shows in the evening. They used the dining saloon as the cinema. And this one evening they were showing Eric Portman in The Man in the Sky, a film about test flying. As can be imagined, there was plenty of aerobatic flying, inasmuch as the test pilot was doing manoeuvres in his test routine. This would be fine sitting quietly in the cinema, but another matter altogether sitting on dining chairs that were not fixed to the floor in a bucking, rolling boat. The horizon in the film going one way and we swaying the other. But we stuck it out and very much enjoyed the film, but needless to say, I think there were very few of us in the audience. Gradually the storm abated, but by now we were a couple of days behind schedule, and we were amused when we heard that the end-of-voyage gala dinner was to take place on the day originally planned, in spite of the fact that we were still 2 days away from landing. But in spite of it being a trifle early, it was great too, and we all thoroughly enjoyed it, and we were now looking forward to our docking at Quebec after a short trip down the St. Lawrence River, which had recently been reopened after the winter freeze-up. By now we were approaching land, and the storms were behind us, and the sea was relatively calm. I was down in our cabin, sorting ourselves out now that the end of the trip was in sight, when suddenly I heard a terrible grinding, graunching noise on the outside of our cabin wall. Mick immediately guessed what it was, and we both dashed up on deck. What a sight met our eyes! We were entering the St. Lawrence River, and although the icebreakers had been through, it was still cold enough for the large chunks of broken ice to freeze together again, and it was the ice scraping the sides of our ship that I had heard. The glaring white of the ice mass was painful to our eyes, so we hurriedly came in to get our sunglasses, but on going back inside I could see nothing, and had to wait until my eyes readjusted to the gloom. But with our sunglasses we were able to enjoy the magnificent sight of Newfoundland in the snow, and the great mass of ice that we were ploughing through. And one of the sights that remain in my memory was of the brightly coloured roofs of the houses that lined the shore, glowing in the brilliant sunshine. Soon Quebec came in sight, and we geared ourselves for our arrival and to the next stage of our journey. 5. The boat at last docked, and all the passengers, the majority looking somewhat weary and in quite a few cases battered, with various parts of their anatomy still encased in plaster from the injuries suffered during the violent storms we had just experienced, staggered down the gangplanks, and I must admit that I was very happy to be on firm ground again, and also looking forward to speaking to officials who spoke the same language as us. So I was rather put out when I found that, as we were now in French-Canadian Quebec, French was their mother tongue, and once again we were having to cope with language difficulties when going through the usual docking procedures. Quebec was the first port of call to be opened up after the winter freeze, hence the reason for our docking there rather than Montreal, which, under normal conditions, would have been our destination. But that part of the St. Lawrence was still awaiting the icebreakers to free it from the winter's icy hold. After all the formalities had been completed, we boarded the train for Toronto. Now we had an extremely long train journey, for although it was still quite early when we started out, it would be midnight before we reached that city. And due to our being delayed by the storms, there was no special boat train to meet us, which would normally have been the case, when, presumably, we would have arrived at Toronto at a decent hour. Fortunately, we were quite unaware of the possible problems ahead of us, and were quite content to sit quietly watching the new and strange countryside as we sped on our way to Toronto. Eventually we arrived at Toronto's main station, and as I said, by now it was midnight, in a strange city with nowhere to go. We were very conscious of the fact that we must be very careful how we spent our money. Being fully aware that our meagre savings were worth only half their value here, and we only had that to live on until one of us found a job. so we certainly didn't want to be parted with more than was necessary by landing ourselves in an expensive hotel, full well knowing what can happen to the uninitiated. And as we stood there in a rather forlorn state, a cabman came over to see if he could help, and we told him of our predicament. And he did no more than go up to a couple of women who were dressed in black, who, in turn, came over to talk to us, and said that they had a guest house and could put us up. By now, we were so tired, we felt that was the best thing to do. So the four of us climbed into the cab, which roared off into the night at high speed, eventually arriving to what seemed a rather run-down-looking district. We went indoors, where we were given something to eat and drink, and shown our room, which, although clean, was far from luxurious, and thankfully fell into bed. Perhaps things wouldn't look quite so bad in the morning. As soon as we woke the next day, we dressed and went downstairs, to the same room that we had had our meal the previous night. The room was small, and little light came in through the window. There was a large table around which were seated 3 or 4 men of varying ages, who were presumably the other lodgers, for it was certainly a lodging house rather than a guest house. In the corner of the room was a small television set, still a rarity in Britain, and sitting in front of it, with eyes glued to the screen, sat a small girl. The 2 women, still dressed in black, were busy serving breakfast. We never did discover their relationship to each other, and whether they were sisters or mother and daughter. But suffice to say they were very pleasant, and we certainly couldn't grumble at the breakfast they gave us, nor the large packet of sandwiches that we were presented with to keep us going during the day, as we were obviously not expected back until evening. The lodgers were all very friendly, but there was a distinct air of disillusionment. The youngest, a chap in his early 20s and from Britain, told us that he'd been living there several months, and he so far had been unable to get regular work, so went boxing several nights a week to get money. This was an eye-opener to us, as we'd been led to believe that there were plenty of jobs, and yet these men were all saying the same thing. Once breakfast was over, we sorted out our room, and armed with our packets of sandwiches, we set off to discover Toronto. Our first impressions of the street in which we found ourselves were not improved by daylight. Everything looked very sordid, but at least we had somewhere to sleep until we could get ourselves sorted out. So our first port of call was to pay a visit to the bank and make sure that our meagre savings had arrived safely. When we were making arrangements before we left England for our money to be transferred over to the Bank of Canada, the manager of Mick's bank had given him a letter of introduction to the manager here, so we felt that that was our first job. But before that, I had to get some overshoes, as winter was still very much with us, and the pavements were covered with slushy snow, and I only had light court shoes to wear. I was surprised to see so many of our well-known stores, such as Woolworths, Boots, etc., appearing as part of the shopping area. After a successful purchase, we went to find the Bank of Canada, which was not difficult, as it was housed in a magnificent building. On entering, we went up to one of the cashiers and showed him our letter, which he took, requesting us to wait a moment. Before long, a very elegant secretary appeared, who welcomed us and asked us to follow her, which we did. This entailed a trip up a lift, eventually arriving in very sumptuous surroundings. As we padded over the deep pile carpets towards the manager's office, I became very conscious of the button I had only just found that was missing off my coat, making me feel very scruffy. One thing that was becoming plain to us was that this was no ordinary bank, but the main bank of Canada, and was on the similar par to the Bank of England. And we were sure that the manager of the Pinner branch back in England had no idea to whom he was addressing the letter. But still we were here, and we were ushered in to meet the great man. He couldn't have been kinder. But he did put us in the picture as to the present economic situation in Canada. There were several reasons for this sudden downward trend in fortunes. One was that there was a general recession over the whole country, but Toronto especially had been inundated with immigrants, as we had seen ourselves. During the previous 6 months before our departure, there were those huge advertising campaigns encouraging people to emigrate with government-sponsored grants. Also, there had been a recent uprising in Hungary, the result of which many Hungarians had fled their country, and many coming to Canada as a safe haven. The result being, not only was there not enough work for the Canadians themselves, but the unemployment figures had jumped up due to the huge influx of immigrants that had flooded the city. Not a happy picture. But our friend at the bank, having explained the situation, wished us well, and stressed that, should we need any help or advice, we were to come and see him. We shook hands and departed. But with youth on our side, we were still not too despondent. After all, Mick was quite prepared to take any job, be it even sweeping the factory floor, until a vacancy became available in his line. 6. The first thing to do was to buy a newspaper. Then find a cafe and over a cup of coffee, go through the job vacancy section. There were plenty of places where we could sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee, and there were also plenty of newspapers to buy, if a trifle larger than those we were used to in England. After ordering our coffee, we settled down to go through the newspapers, and eventually found the section we required. Not being used to papers of such immense proportions, only to discover that there were indeed very few vacancies, and none in Mick's line. As we sat drinking our coffee and mulling over the situation, I was horrified to see one of the customers, an elderly gentleman, as he got up to go, put the heavy glass ashtray, with which all the tables were supplied, in his coat pocket and leave the cafe. What was the world coming to? Mick felt that the next thing to do was contact de Havilland's. Once again we managed to do that without too much difficulty, and straight away he was able to speak to the personnel officer, whom, it transpired, was herself from England. But she could offer nothing. There was not a single job available. Not even sweeping the floors, which Mick said that he was quite prepared to do. She was very upset about the situation, but there was just nothing that she could do to help. He then started to ring other firms, but all to no avail. The answer was always the same. When it was time to eat our sandwiches, we decided that the warmest place would be the waiting room in the main railway station. Our landladies certainly didn't want us to starve, and by the time we had ploughed our way through the first packet of sandwiches, we couldn't eat any more, and rather guiltily deposited the second packet in a waste paper bin. The rest of the afternoon we wandered around Toronto, and were appalled on coming across a labour exchange to see queues of men, many very drunk, standing or in some cases sprawling on the pavement, waiting for something to happen. It was so reminiscent of Britain in the 1930s. The next day we bought more papers and rang more firms. but it seemed hopeless. So we decided to go to the immigration office and discuss with them the possibilities of going over to British Columbia. But they said that the situation was just as bad there, and we felt that we daren't risk going on the off chance, for the cost of the fare to British Columbia was the same as our fare home. And at least we had that, if the worst came to the worst. But we were still hopeful that our luck might change. We asked about going down into America, but they said that that was out of the question. We had to stay in Canada for 2 years. It wasn't until our return home we reasoned that, as we were free agents, not having gone under a government scheme, this information was obviously incorrect, but at that time we were getting so bemused we didn't question it. But one piece of information that they did impart that was of interest to us was on questioning us as to where we were staying, and on hearing that it was a lodging house in Mutual Street, they advised us to get out as soon as possible, as it was a red light district and regularly raided by the police. I was not surprised. We hurriedly brought yet another paper, but this time for apartments. And as we sat perusing the ads over yet another cup of coffee, so our conversation was overheard by a middle-aged dear soul, who introduced herself as an immigrant of many years' standing, and as we were obviously looking for somewhere to live, thought we might like her knowledge of the localities around Toronto, as to which were good areas and those best to avoid, etc. We found that there was an apartment advertised in a suburb called Mimico, which our Good Samaritan said was worth looking at. And so, after thanking her, we went out and telephoned the advertiser. Fortunately, the apartment was still free, and so it was arranged that we should go out and see it the next morning. By now, I couldn't leave Mutual Street fast enough. And now, with the sound of a duck having a midnight feast along the hull of the Erica, this is the Narrowboat Erica, signing off for the night and wishing you a very restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature outside 13.1 degrees. Inside 20 degrees. Humidity 71%. Dew point 7 degrees. Wind direction west. Wind strength 6 miles per hour. Barometric pressure 999.7, falling. Cloud cover 100%. Cloud ceiling 9,600 feet. Precipitation nil. Moon phase 100%. Full moon. Day length 13 hours 45 minutes. Sunset 20:01. Sky casting 6:14.